Hello and welcome to the latest in our webcast series. My name's Dawn and this is Chris.
And today we're going to talk a little bit about building relationships with venues. It's part of the work we do through Nuffield Laboratory, which is our artistic development program through which we collaborate with artists developing new work and honing skills.
So why building relationship with venues? Why this topic? Well, it's something we get asked about a lot, and it seems to be kind of shrouded in mystery a little bit sometimes when we connect with artists in the industry. But we should caveat it by saying that when we sat down to discuss this topic in the office and figure out what to tell you, there seem to be so many different valid ways of doing it. And so this is just a collection of some of the tips that we have for you to think about.
So there are lots of reasons why you might want to connect with a venue. The likelihood is that in the long term at least you'll be looking to get your work produced or programmed by the organisation. But there are lots of other reasons. You may want to introduce yourself as an artist, you might want to kind of work through their talent development scheme, or you might be looking to get feedback on a piece of work or a script that you've been developing, amongst kind of many other reasons.
Yeah, and of course there are lots of reasons why venues want to connect with artists as well, and sometimes those kind of motives are going to overlap and kind of harmonise, and other times they're going to be a discord. But I suppose rather than thinking of it as a moment in time, that's why it's really helpful to think about these things as long-term relationships that you want to let grow. Much like the romantic relationship analogy we use all the time, it's worth investing more time in it when you can. But there's no question that even though these relationships can be complicated, they are worth building, because particularly as an individual artist there will be times in your career when having the weight of and the backing of a venue will help you to get where you need to be.
So what venue should you connect with? You should always consider your local venue, even if it's not an artistic match with you, because a lot of the time local theatres will have sort of priorities for investing locally in artists. And that can even be true in London, depending on what borough you're in. Obviously, aesthetics are important, though. So, having an artistic match, an artistic resonance between your work and the venue's work is important. But most importantly, probably is values and making sure that your values align. So, what kind of experience do they want to give their audiences? Do they champion accessibility, education, innovation? Those are just a few examples. They might have lots of different priorities, and if they're the same as yours, then that's probably a good relationship. Ideally, you should have seen a venue's work before you approach them. If not, then just have a clear narrative of why not. So if you've just moved to the city, let them know that, because it sort of justifies it. But obviously, it should be a right match for you as an artist, but it might not be the right match for the project sometimes. But then again, if this isn't the right project for them, another project might be. So it's worth, kind of thinking this one might be too experimental, it might be too family friendly. What are they looking for? And then you can go back to them another time and kind of keep that relationship going with the next project, if you're a fit.
Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about the how of making contact with venues. And we'll start with the general introduction, particularly if you want to ultimately have your work produced or developed, or to connect with the talent development schemes with a venue. It's probably helpful to start by making a general introduction, just to give them a sense of who you are and your work. When you're doing this, there's a lot of kind of different messages about who you should contact, and actually when we spoke about it in the office we all had some slightly different ideas, but ultimately what we agreed on was that just contacting the artistic director is probably not going to be your best route to getting a response, but a lot of the time sending an email is helpful, but just make sure you're keeping an eye on who the other people in the venue are that might be tasked with building new relationships on behalf of the company. And email them as well, so it might be an associate director or associate producer, artist development producer, or if it's not an obvious thing when you look at the website, just give them a quick phone and ask who's the best person for me to connect with, to talk about having a coffee with someone at the theatre.
And that's just because artistic directors are busy people, so it's easy for them to kind of see an email, think they'll respond to it, and then it all falls down their list of things to do. Yeah,
and if you do decide to email more than one person in the organisation, probably best not to copy them into the same email, but to send them two separate emails, but mention in the emails that you've emailed the other person, and that gives them a way to use their own internal processes to deal with your query. You should try to think about personalising your email. Obviously 101, don't leave the name of somebody else in another venue that you emailed just before, but also do a little bit of research on the spaces and the projects. Don't mention new writing being your life's passion if it's a venue that does no new writing. And just a point I suppose about timing. People, obviously, it's their job to kind of process emails, but they're also human individuals who will have lives, and it's probably prudent to avoid times like Friday night, Sunday day times, times when people might be relaxing, especially because now everyone has their emails on their phone, and it's their choice to look at it, but it's just, you probably just don't want to be that person that emails when someone's sitting with a PIMS. I think it's just, if you're a freelancer and you have no time, and this 2-hour window on a Friday night is all you've got to write emails, just store them up as drafts and send them out at a time that, you know, feels a bit more palatable for people to be in a work headspace. So the email itself, try not to have more than 2 paragraphs. Lead with the things that excite you about the venue's work, and then talk a little bit about you and your practice and give us a real flavour of what your passion is. And remember that what you're asking, if you're just saying, I like your work, I'd love to know more and talk to you a little bit about what I do, can we have a coffee? That's not an unreasonable request, and don't ever think that it is. There will be times that people don't get back to you, but it's okay to ask, and I think if you go in with a kind of open approach, if people don't get back to you, it's not because you've been unreasonable, it's just because they haven't.
And it's okay to try again and contact them again.
Yeah.
But don't turn that into a kind of pester relationship where you're, you know, emailing every day trying to get a response, because that really will taint the relationship.
Mm-hmm. And if you do get a response back from them, try and match the email style of the person that's responding. So if they're really formal, you know, try and keep your emails quite formal. If they're quite conversational, it's probably okay for you to do the same thing. And I suppose in those kind of conversations, just remember that those people at the other end, it's not a faceless kind of organisation. It's just another human individual trying to do a thing. But venues are probably quite bogged down in process and language that makes sense to them. But if you've considered what they've said to you carefully and you're unsure about anything, just ask, because they are still people who are just trying to achieve their own goals and get it right.
So script reading. We won't say a huge amount about it, as kind of every theatre and venue have their own policy on script reading, and some people don't have the resource to read unsolicited scripts. So kind of our advice is just make sure you do your research, find out how venues build relationships with writers, whether they can read unsolicited scripts, or whether it's better for you to kind of approach them, have a coffee, or maybe get them to come and see some of your work on at a different space. It just depends on different theatres, so just make sure you look it up.
So next we're going to talk about inviting people to see your work. I suppose first up, finding the right moment in advance of a show or an R&D to invite venues along. And one of the things that I've noticed is that just at the moment where you know enough about what the show or R&D is going to be, and we have the dates and the details, often horribly coincides with the moment as a lead artist or director you feel the least confident about the work, because you're still in that development process and you're unsure whether it's going to work out the way you want it to. And so it seems really common that artists get cold feet at that moment and think, I'm just not sure, I feel ready to share it. And so many artists have said to me, I had a show on last month but I didn't think it was going to be any good, and it actually turned out fine, but then it's too late to invite people. So I think try and anticipate this before you get into that headspace, before you get into the rehearsal room, and try and have your contacts lined up in advance, and don't listen to that voice that's doubting yourself. Once you have sent out some invites, if someone has expressed interest but not confirmed, or you haven't heard back from them, just give them a little reminder or a nudge after your first night. It's always helpful if you have any reviews at that point, just to kind of throw those in.
And it kind of works as well for R&Ds, doesn't it? Because it's that, like, when you know halfway through what it's kind of looking like, you can perhaps kind of give them a little bit of information, and people love those kind of tidbits and inside looks before they see a show.
As long as you keep it succinct and kind of tidbit, not kind of...
Not essay.
It's worth having a list yourself of sort of cultivees, of people that you are hoping to build relationships with in the longer term, creating a spreadsheet of those contacts, and slowly growing it and building it and making sure it's a priority that those people are invited to all of the things that you do.
Yeah, and then to keep track as well of who you've invited to what and who's come to see what and what their responses have been, just so you kind of, when you're talking to a lot of individuals, a lot of different venues, you don't lose track of the conversations you're having with each one.
Yeah, but then specific to each project, you probably want to add in some different names, but it doesn't mean you shouldn't invite those core lists of people that you're always trying to build relationships with.
And for the kind of the top 20 key contacts that you've got, you should always try and send personal emails, and kind of sort of target them with information that you know is specific to that relationship. And then, you know, even if you're inviting people to come and then they don't end up coming to see the work, or they look like they're going to and then they pull out at the last minute, the process of having invited them is still good. It means you're kind of getting on a venue's radar. It shows that you're doing work, which is always valuable to demonstrate. And it's much more positive to have invited someone and them not come than for you to be a total unknown.
And remember that venues are always talking, we're talking about artists all the time within a venue, but also between venues and between other artists, and so having your name out there is no bad thing. So one of the trickiest things to get to and to distill into one conversation is approaching venues to programme your work. There's a myriad of different ways of programming and different types of deals and venues. So we've tried to distill some of that, but obviously there's a lot of diversity in the way that people deal with it. And it's worth, I suppose, starting by thinking about, more generally and for each project, a group of venues that you might want to just tour to and bring your work, and venues that you might want a more significant partnership or relationship with. And do a bit of research into venues and see if you can tell from other projects that they've done and how they're funded when they like to join a development process. Some people like a really finished product, they like to know that what they're getting, and some people really want to be involved from an early stage of development in order to feel ownership over it. So when you're thinking about putting a tour together or about booking a few different stops, probably one of the first things to start with would be thinking about who that sort of lead partner might be, even if it's in a production just by your company or you as an artist. Who is that flagship venue or company that's going to be your main support? Try and find this as far in advance as possible, and you probably need it in place before you put in a Grants for the Arts, for example. And it's your first port of call. It's a venue who'll commit to supporting you, perhaps on condition of Grants for the Arts, either financially or with in-kind support or some mixture of the two. And have a research into what their previous models have been like with other companies. And as that relationship is developing, not at first, see if you can push for in association with credit or sort of with support from. It might not happen, but it's always worth trying to reflect what that relationship has been, and it really helps if the venue's got a reputation.
And it definitely helps with funding applications to have kind of pencil bookings and stuff. So having that key lead person booking you in might also help you get other people to pencil book you as well, because that person has. So
yeah. And it may be obvious, but approach people who have experience producing the sort of work that you're doing, but also spaces that fit your work. Get the tech spec, ask for the tech spec, and don't approach people to put something in their studio when they don't have a studio. Happens to us quite a lot, that, doesn't it?
When you're going to contact a venue is really important. For a small scale, the minimum we would suggest is kind of 6 to 8 months in advance. For something larger, at least a year.
Yeah, but it varies.
But it varies venue to venue. They have different schedules for their programming. Some are much further in advance, some are much more last minute. As
soon as possible, really.
In terms of negotiating a deal, the starting point is for you to think about how much it actually costs you to put on your show, to come up with a reasonable figure about what you would hope to charge. You should start potentially with, if you're doing a Grants for the Arts application, sort of 2 prices. One that you might suggest to a venue if you got funding, and if you weren't funded, what you would have to charge. Just because it kind of indicates to a venue that you know what you're talking about, for one thing. Before you start to negotiate with a venue, research what other work they've got that they're programming, what are they selling their ticket prices as, how many seats have they got, how are they funded, are they funded? Because that will give you an idea about what sort of thing they might be able to pay in terms of a guarantee. But if you're sort of having to set out venturing a figure towards them, then start with something that you think is optimistic but not unreasonably high. And then if they, as they probably will, be kind of disinclined to go with that, then negotiate down from there and then push for a guarantee against a split of the box office takings. And then, after that, consider just a split with them, with no guarantee.
And there are certain deals which just on the face of it can look a bit exploitative. If there's a split that's massively in the venue's favour and the show, costs you a fair bit to bring, I'd be asking some serious questions about that.
Yeah, and I think it's worth remembering that there are other places to go to. So if this venue may just not be the right match, but equally sometimes it might be that you have to take a hit on one venue to build a relationship or to secure other venues in the tour.
Oh, and ask if you've managed to get that lead partner, that person who's your supportive venue, give them a shout, give them a phone. That's probably what you want out of that relationship, is that advice. I've just been speaking to X venue, I'm not sure about this deal. Hopefully that's what they should be able to provide. So obviously we haven't covered all the different ways you might want to approach a venue there, but that's just sort of some key bits. In terms of looking forward, if a venue says no to your first request, see if you can go back to them and just find out a bit about why, a bit more detail as soon as you can to help you plan the next move. And see if there's something that you can go back and ask them for that's different. You know, if maybe they've said that your work is too risky, they're not sure they'll be able to get an audience for it, see if you might be able to get a week residency or R&D there, or a bit of support where you could have a sharing at the end that you might be able to into to show them that you can get audience. Think about the ways that you could build on from that, so it's not just a straight no. And just remember that not every venue is good and not every venue is bad when it comes to dealing with artists. Most of them are filled with creative people with good intentions, and some are potentially willing to exploit artists. For your part, I suppose, try and do what you can to bridge the gap in understanding. But don't take any offers for development or programming that feel wrong in your gut. Only you know what is the most helpful way for you to be supported.
And you can take advice from other artists who perhaps have been there, or as we talked about, that lead venue that you might have built a relationship with, to get advice on that and check that what you're feeling is right. So that's all we're going to say for today. We hope that has been kind of interesting for you and has helped demystify the process of how to contact a venue a little bit. If you want to get in touch with us and ask us any more questions, then please do. All the information's on our website. And let us know if there's any other topics you'd like us to cover in the webcasts, and we'll try and kind of create another one for you. And watch out for the marketing packs. I think it's probably going to be the next one we're going to do. So this is kind of tied together, so look out for that one.
Thanks.
See you later.